Dane Wigington has an extensive background in solar energy. He is a former employee of Bechtel Power Corp and was a licensed contractor in California and Arizona. Dane is the lead researcher for Geoengineering Watch and has investigated all levels of weather control from chemtrails to HARP. He assisted Mike Murphy with his production of What in the Hell Are They Spraying, and has appeared on an extensive number of interviews to explain the environmental dangers we face on a global level. His personal residence was featured in a cover article on the world's largest renewable energy magazine, Home Power. He owns a 1,600-acre wildlife preserve next to Lake Shasta in Northern California. Dane Wigington, thank you for joining us here on the Global Freedom Report.
Thanks for having me, Brent.
It's a pleasure. Let's start real basic. What exactly is geoengineering?
Geoengineering is a term that applies to global weather modification, climate modification programs. It's a term many people are not familiar with. It can apply to programs that involve ocean fertilization, but the programs we focus on are aerosol dispersed into the atmosphere, which is an attempt to control climate patterns and overall weather climatic scenarios.
Okay, that's a little complex. That's, I suppose, fair. Now, before I ask you the question, I kind of cheated. I looked up on Wikipedia, and according to Wikipedia, geoengineering refers to climate modification specifically designed to mitigate global warming. Now, it's pretty clear that the myth of global warming is just that, a myth. Does that in some way make geoengineering obsolete or invalid?
No, it doesn't, and I would hold judgment on the state of the climate at this point. And again, I'm not an Al Gore fan or carbon credits or any of those shams, but geoengineering has, in fact, that's Wikipedia's benign definition of geoengineering, but in fact, you have many more applications. There's many more layers to this onion. Military, strategic purposes, which are for climate manipulation. That has nothing to do with mitigating global warming. But these programs, Brent, in fact, now appear to have triggered climate feedback mechanisms that are, in fact, warming the planet. And again, you can't throw a giant wrench into these works. You can't cover the globe in a membrane of toxic metallic materials and not have some sort of blowback. And that's what we're experiencing now. They appear to have triggered a mass methane expulsion in the Arctic. And the geoengineering programs, because it's a particulate in the upper atmosphere, it shreds ozone. Many people in the northern hemisphere are noticing how hot the sun feels on their face. This is not their imagination. There's a massive northern hemisphere ozone hole now. This is not the southern hemisphere hole we've heard about for decades. This is new. They're muzzling scientists if they try to talk to the media on this. It's to be found online. I don't expect anybody to believe me. So these programs that have now decimated the atmosphere, there's more energy from the sun penetrating into the oceans. That has helped stop methane hydrates, which triggers a positive feedback loop. There's a lot going on, and all roads lead back to geoengineering, causing basically planetary decimation.
In other words, the elephant is finally scratching. The Earth is finally getting annoyed by all the mosquitoes, so to speak. Yes,
absolutely. And people, as far as the drought, for example, the planet, again, these programs, although they deflect incoming thermal energy from the sun, they trap. Data shows at this point they trap more than they deflect. So although the geoengineering can create a widespread cooled area, it comes to the cost of the worst overall warming and a decimated atmosphere. So the more they spray, the more they have to spray. It paints us further and further into the corner. And in the meantime, everything they spray up there comes down on us. And the testing done in Northern California, for example, is getting more alarming all the time. Almost 100 tests in Northern California. Massive soil contamination. Rain is horrifically contaminated. These are all done at the state's lab. And again, the amount of fallout and destruction being caused by these programs can't be overstated.
No, and it's like, the law of thermodynamics. You cannot eliminate energy. You can only transform it. I lived in New York for the first 30 years of my life, New York City, and the buildings would all keep all the heat in, so that if you could survive summer in New York, you can survive any humidity in the world. I mean, it was that bad. And, these people are playing with things that I personally think that there's some areas of science, you just don't go there. You just leave it to God. How advanced is weather modification technology today, to the best of your knowledge?
Clearly, it's a very haphazard science. If anybody has seen Michael Murphy's first film, What in the World They Sprang, the world's most recognized geoengineer, David Keith, was caught on film there with a question. I was fortunate enough to get into him at an international conference as to have there been any human respiratory studies done, health effects, soil toxicity in regard to their proposal of dumping 20 million tons of aluminum nanoparticles into the atmosphere. After trying to dodge the question, he finally answered that no, nothing had been done, no studies, and he said, quote, terrible things happen tomorrow, we don't know. That's not a very precise answer from a quote scientist. So this is a very haphazard and seat-of-the-pants operation that's absolutely massive in scale, virtually altering and thwarting all Earth's natural systems. And I say that with total confidence. Global dimming, at this point, a term many people are not familiar with. This term refers to how much of the sun's direct light no longer reaches the surface of the planet. Global dimming figures are about 20% today, compared to 5 decades ago. So the amount of materials that they have put into the atmosphere that are now thwarting Earth's natural climate systems is absolutely horrific. And the drought we're experiencing right now can really only be attributed to these aerosols, because science is clear, they diminish and disperse rainfall. So although you get deluges in places and floods in places, you have protracted drought in others, and clearly this leads back to geoengineering, Brent.
Now, I know the Russians were working on weather modification in the 1950s, and their work was state-of-the-art. Is that still true today?
They seem to be well along this road also. And we just turned up some articles, documentation on the Russian weather modification scientists touring the U.S., the U.S.'s weather modification facilities in the late 60s at the height of the Cold War, showing a clear collaboration between superpowers. We turned up another document from NASA, from the NASA archives, outlining the existing U.S. weather modification programs in 1966 that were already in budgets, which are outlined in this 80-page document, in the hundreds of millions of dollars. This has been going on for a very long time, ramped up the whole way through, and these documents can be found on geoengineeringwatch.org. That's our website, and a lot of this data can be found there.
Yeah, we're going to put a link to our website and make sure people know about that, definitely. What national or international bodies oversee studies and experimentation and weather control, or are there any?
There are. The Royal Society is one major entity. You're getting input now from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This, of course, leads back to the UN, the global governance. We're turning up more documentation on this all the time. And again, there is an absolute mountain of data on the ongoing effort to establish global governance for the geoengineering programs, which nobody seems willing to admit are going on, although they're establishing global governance for this. So it's the biggest elephant in the room by far, and its effect on the natural systems are by far the largest, bar none. And yet these programs go completely overlooked by academia that still pretends that there's nothing going on in our skies, even though we're being buried under a mountain of toxic metals and our natural weather systems are being disrupted from top to bottom. And again, what they've triggered, Brent, this methane mass explosion that appears to have had geoengineering as a major causal factor, the ramifications from what these programs appear to have helped triggered are very, very dire. And now they appear to be spraying even more to try to cover the damage they've already done. So again, the gravity of geoengineering can't be overstated, shredding the ozone, poisoning everything on the ground, every breath we take, and triggering climate feedback systems that literally could hold life in the balance if these programs continue.
Well, now the $64,000 question, the one everyone's waiting for. A recent superstorm on the U.S. East Coast occurred when high-powered Hurricane Sandy met up with two other storms over New York City, one from the west, one from the north, resulting in a perfect storm, to use the cinematic vernacular. Do you believe or do you have evidence to suggest that this storm was in any way geoengineered?
I do believe that it absolutely was manipulated. We have evidence that does suggest that. There are monitoring facilities for the HAARP radio wave projections. Some of the strongest readings ever reported were picked up over New York prior to Sandy's impact. What HAARP does, HAARP is an ionosphere heater that many people have heard of the facility, High Altitude Auroral Research Project. This heats the atmosphere to 15,000 degrees or more over a large area. This causes a bulge in the atmosphere. Thus, there is a vacuum underneath which pulls in whatever's below weather-wise. So when you have modeling, Brent, that's 5 days out projecting a 90-degree easterly turn, which is not usual for a storm of that size, then one has to be suspect just from that. And one also has to consider that the modeling is being done by the very defense contractors that do the weather modifications. So you literally have the fox running the hen house. Raytheon does all the weather modeling. Raytheon does all the weather modeling for the National Weather Service and NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Lockheed Martin does all the modeling for the FAA. So the people doing the weather modification are doing the modeling. That's why the modeling matches what happens. A storm that size, now, on the strength of the storm, certainly it appears to have been steered into that location. On the strength of the storm, however, the strength of the storm appears to have been reduced, not strengthened. When you have a storm with 940-plus millibar pressure center and 1,000 miles circulation, that should have been a Cat 3, Cat 4 storm. I've spoken with some other experts on this, meteorologists that have the same conclusion. So it appears that Sandy was a measured blow delivered to a specific location for reasons that we can all speculate about.
Well, let's go on. I mean, you spoke to a meteorologist about this. My producer last week spoke with a noted meteorologist, Scott Stevens. He, at the time, said he thought Hurricane Sandy was not weather controlled. Have you found any consensus, either among your colleagues or among other meteorologists, other weather experts, as to whether climate control was involved in the superstorm? I get that you think it is, and you know at least one person who has. Is there any kind of consensus one way or the other?
I've spoken to Scott as well since then, and perhaps I didn't hear the conversation you are referring to, but his conclusion has changed now. So, whether it's on over more data or not, I'm not sure. But if you look at data for storms of that pressure center with a circulation of that size, would be unprecedented for them to be a Cat 1 or less. And so you have these anomalies that are really inexplicable any other way. There's other anomalies as well, that if one starts to look at these weather systems that all point only toward massive manipulation. And that second part of Sandy is this: when a hurricane hits and it starts snowing at 40-plus degrees temperatures, and this is now occurring across the U.S., especially in the fall and the spring when we're warmer times of year than dead winter. It's called ice nucleation for weather modification. That's another aspect that we saw on Sandy. When you have a hurricane hit and it snows, massive snowstorms from a hurricane, these are not normal events. And we see on the radar what appears to be ice nucleation occurring. We have the patents for ice nucleation for weather modification, one from NASA, which describes the chemical method by which what should be a rainstorm is converted to a snowstorm by chemical application. Now, this sounds very implausible to people that you turn what should be rain into snow. I would point to a chemical first aid ice pack that can sit on a shelf for 20 years. When those chemicals are mixed, you have ice. And then we have the patents. We have open admissions from China that they are doing exactly this. Anybody can research this online. If they look up China creates snowstorms, China can do it. Certainly we can. And we're seeing that. We saw that with Sandy. We saw that in the storm right after Sandy, where the snow came in and suddenly.
And we had reports from people who said they had these odd snowstorms, absolutely, in places and times that they just didn't understand. Okay, if the hurricane was geoengineered, have you any guess as to who might have done it, and more importantly, why?
We're entering ground where I can't give any solid answer. Perhaps it's a demonstration of the abilities that they have together now, the control they're able to exercise at great expense, I might add. Anytime you meddle with these systems, you can only do harm, and they are certainly doing harm. But as far as the exact geopolitical objectives here, I could only begin to speculate. I'm sure we could go a lot of different directions on that, but the storm being maneuvered and steered appears really hard to dispute if one looks at the data. And you'll find weather organizations like the Weather Channel that tries very hard to explain on some of their shows why it's snowing 5 degrees, and they refer to it as heavy, wet snow, heavy, wet snow. This is a new phenomenon. These giant, super heavy cement snowflakes that come down, breaking trees at 45 degrees, and the air eventually cools down. It's, the nucleation process cools down the region eventually, but when those first flakes fall, we're seeing snowstorms at, in the last week, Salt Lake City, 50 degrees, a couple places in Idaho, 50 degrees. This is absolutely defying the laws of physics, sort of weather modification.
Which raises the issue. I mean, climate control is potentially a weapon of such unbelievable proportions, such drastic potential effects. Is there a defense against climate control technology, either in existence or in theory?
The only defense that we can imagine is to stop these programs, and that's our attempt to try to get information out. And it appears that they have been gearing up for these programs and trying to structure things in such a manner where they would be able to sustain this indefinitely. So much so that the entire system appears to be rigged not to show the massive, massive contamination coming from these programs. I've personally been in high-level EPA meetings in Sacramento. One was arranged by a congressional rep, 5 high-level EPA people there, closed-room meeting. I was told to my face, in so many words, the system is rigged, that they are told to test for combustion particulates only. The rest of the sample goes out the window. It's hard to find what you're told not to look for. They stopped testing for aluminum in California's water supply in 2002. Why is that? I mean, virtually they have shut down any method by which to confirm this mountain of metal that's falling on us. I was invited to a closed-door meeting for Redding Environmental Waste. This is the northernmost city in California. They're getting massive spikes of aluminum in the Sacramento River, which is all the water for Southern California. They won't admit to it. They tied my hands from disclosing the information that they gave to me there. And, you have agencies across the board literally shoving their head in the sand and allowing this contamination to go unchecked.
Because, unfortunately, in this society, money is more important than anything else, and so people will do anything for money. I take it people can learn more about geoengineering from Geoengineering Watch. Is that correct?
Geoengineeringwatch.org. And another excellent tool to share this message with is imperative we all share. Why in the world are they spraying? Michael Murphy's new documentary. If people buy a commercial copy, which certainly helps to keep his efforts going, it's the only thing keeping his efforts going, then they can make as many copies as they want, because he is very generously not copyrighted. His goal is to get the word out. So that's another tool. When you said on the money being the bottom line motive, you're absolutely correct. In the case of the state of California, because they're about $30 billion in the hole every year, getting a backdoor handout from the federal government to keep the doors open, they can't and won't say a word about the massive decimation that's happening in this state to the soil, to the waters. They can't and won't say a word because they're more interested in their handout every year.
Yeah, exactly. And the Michael Murphy films, are they available through the geoengineeringwatch.org website, or are there links from there?
There are. Yes, and they can go to geoengineeringwatch.org, or they can go directly to why in the world are they spraying.org. Either place will
Yeah, but we're we'll put both up as links on our website, but I want to send people over to geoengineeringwatch.org as well. My guest has been Dane Wigington. Dane, I want to thank you for the time you were with us and how eloquently you have explained these complex issues. The website is www.geoengineeringwatch.org. Dane, thanks a lot, and please keep up your important work on our behalf.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.